on.
Hi, Miss, and welcome to our history final exam. We are Cuban Missile Crisis group, and here is Gael, Gemma, Domenica, and me, Alejandra. So let's begin.
Okay, Cuban Missile Crisis lasts 14 days between October 14 and October 28 in 1962. Those involved were the United States, the Soviet Union, and Cuba. The conflicts arrived as a result of the discovery by the United States of Soviet medium-range nuclear missiles based in Cuban territory. This historical event is also called the October Crisis or the Caribbean Crisis. The confrontation is often considered the Cold War came to escalating into a full nuclear war. Next. Some context is given by the political confrontation between the United States and the Soviet Union due to their ideological conflicts. The Cuban Revolution promotes several measures of a socialist nature that affect USA interests on the islands. Because of that, the Americans bring an agenda aimed overthrowing Cuba's socialist regime. The 1961 landing in the Bay of Pigs during the Kennedy administration was a complete failure since the military response command by Fidel Castro managed to defeat the invasion in less than 72 hours. Since the 1968 economic blockade applied by the United States and Cuba, they have been constantly monitoring them. Violating their airspace. In this way, they noticed the missile of the Soviet Union. Next, the missiles that were installed in Cuba have the potential to harm the United States, which is why they made a claim to the United Nations Security Committee. Also, it was considered as a direct threat to the nation that President John F. Kennedy declared quarantine for citizens the maximum alert for the country naval force. The map you see on the slide is the range of the missile that reside in Cuba. Next, with pressure from the United States, the Organización de Estados Americanos intervened and imposed sanctions on the Cuban government and terminated the naval blockade. Kennedy, in a message to the nation, declared on high alert, invoking DEFCON 3, that it was only used in this time and in the fall of the Twin Towers. Black Saturday bears that name because it was a crucial day where would break out the war or peace will continue. The Soviet Union withdrew the missiles in exchange for the Americans not sponsoring any overthrow of Fidel Castro. The idea of having this base from the Soviet Union sold Cuban citizens the idea of security, so they were happy to receive the missiles in the country. Next. With the promise of not ending the Fidel Castro regime, the confrontation ends, and the political terrain is one more equalized. However, this way only one of the main milestones of the Cold War that will continue for more than 25 years.
Okay. During this time of period, we have the civil rights movement that came to national prominence in the United States during the mid-1950s and continuing to challenge racial segregation and discrimination throughout the 1960s. One of the highlights during this year was the freedom rides that began with a group of 7 African American and 6 white who boarded 2 buses bound from New Orleans, testing the Supreme Court's ruling on the case of Baytown, Virginia, which extended an early ruling banning segregated interstate bus travel to include bus terminals and restrooms. The so-called freedom rides used facilities for the opposite race as their bus made stops along the way. The group was confronted by violence in South Carolina. When the bus stopped to change a slashed tire, the vehicle was firebombed and the freedom riders were beaten. Unable to travel farther, the regional riders were replaced by the second group of 10. As riders were either arrested or beaten, more groups of freedom riders will take their place. The Kennedy administration announced the ban segregation in all facilities under its jurisdiction, but the riots continue. Students from all over the country purchased bus tickets to the south and crowded into jails in Jackson, Mississippi. With the participation of Northern students came even more press coverage. That's why on November 1st, in 1961, the ruling that segregation in interstate buses and facilities was illegal took effect. In the economic sphere, next slide. In the economic spheres, by 1962, Kennedy's domestic political scene bleak. Unemployment remained high and the stock market had failed to recover after losing a quarter of its value. The president finally decided that only a bold domestic program, including tax cuts, would restore his political momentum. That's why the president proposed to cut income taxes from a range of 20 to 90% to 14 to 65%. Also, he proposed cut in corporate tax rates from 62% to 57%. Ironically, economic growth expanded, and Republicans and conservative Democrats in the Congress insist that reducing taxes without corresponding spending cuts was unacceptable. But Kennedy disagreed, arguing that a rising tide lifts all boats and that strong economic growth will not continue without lowered taxes. Next. Now we have the woman role. At the beginning of this decade, women role were portrayed on television and advertisements as happy homemakers, secretaries, teachers, and nurses. Women who didn't get married were despised as unattractive. Women's legal rights were further promoted by the Civil Rights, which banned employment discrimination on the basis of gender. The law also established the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, which will enforce the law as well as other anti-discrimination legislation. Women took an active role in politics in greater numbers. Any individual, such as Fannie Lou Hamer and Johan Baez, made tremendous efforts as individuals and as a part of a larger civil rights groups. In addition, organizations like Women's Strikes for Peace by Bella Abzug and Dagmar Wilson and the National Organization for Women, NOW, by Betty Friedan, brought women together to influence political and social policy. Next. As a fun fact, these were 6 things that women couldn't do in the 1960s. First was to get a credit card. Bank could refuse to issue a credit card to unmarried women, and even if she was married, her husband was required to consign. Serve on a jury. The main reason women were kept out of jury pools was that they were considered the center of the home, which was their primary responsibility as caregivers. They were also thought to be too fragile to hear the grisly details of crimes and too sympathetic by nature to be able to remain objective about those accused of offense. Also, take birth control pills were illegal at that time. Also, get an EV language education. Yale and Princeton didn't accept female students until 1969. Harvard didn't admit women until 1977. And finally, women weren't allowed to talk open about sex. The society made them women feel guilty if they talk about this specific topic. Next.
Okay, so now we're going to talk about the cultural events, music, videos, movies, etc. Movies, The Beatles, of course, Love Me Do. It was number 17 on the British pop charts, and it topped number 1. And 2 years after its release, it was top number 1 in the US. So Elvis Presley, Return to Sender, it was #1 on the UK singles chart, and it was also #2 on American Billboard singles chart. And also it was one of his last songs until he started his actor career and started to make all that kind of movies. And we also have the twist and the Watusi that there were like popular and crazy dances in the US and around the world. And it was huge popular because people were animated in parties and all that stuff. So in movies, we have Lawrence of Arabia. It was the first film to showcase the enormity and the beauty of the Saharan desert. And also we have that Lawrence of Arabia was very popular because it was Best Picture Oscar winner. And next, we have Marilyn Monroe singing to JFK on his gala Happy Birthday, and it was controversial because she was very sexy, and he made that sexy move, and they started to think that she was dating JFK. So next, we have To Kill a Mockingbird. It was like the best adaptation of Harper Lee's best-selling movies and novel, and it was like very criticized but very popular, not only in the US but the world. And now we have Dr. No, that was the first film in the James Bond series, and it was very popular not just because it was the first one, but James Bond was very popular at 1962 because all the Cold War stuff that we have seen not only here but in history class. So in TV shows, we have Johnny Carson, begins as presenter of the TV show, and Tonight Show was like, it has so many years on TV, and he was very young at that age. Now he's very, very, very old. And now we have sports. FIFA World Cup that was in Chile, of course, the winner was Brazil, and Chile was at the 3rd place, and it was a very huge deal. Well, FIFA is a very huge deal, but it was the 7th FIFA World Cup. So next, we have the Tour de France. It was Jacques Anquetil that won for the 3rd straight time. It was like one of his best sports, and he's like a very, very doing well in biking. So in arts, we have Andy Warhol and his famous Campbell soup cans. It was very controversial and also like famous at the time because it was like revolutionary in this aspect of arts. We have also the first Romeo and Juliet in the Mariinsky Ballet and now Russia and St. Petersburg. So it was also a battle between the Soviet Union and the US in this aspect of arts and ballet. Next, we have obviously comics, The Amazing Spider-Man #15, and also we have Batman #148. And that's it.
So the next thing we're going to talk about is science and technology and the space race. The space became another arena for the two Cold War opponents with the response of the USSR in 1955. This race lasted 20 years, full of competitions and first-time event related to space innovation in the year 1962. President John F. Kennedy made the public claim that the U.S. will land a man on the moon before the end of the decade. In February 1962, John Glenn became the first American to orbit Earth, and by the end of that year, the foundations of NASA's Lunar Landing Program, Project Apollo, were in place. Next, please. Arm race. With the Cuban Missile Crisis in 1962, this race reached to its peak. This days of tension and disagreement between the two countries finally ended with the Soviet leader Nikita Khrushchev agreed to remove the Russian missiles from Cuba in exchange for a promise from the US to respect the Cuba territorial sovereignty and remove its missiles from Turkey. But this last fact was kept out of the public knowledge. Next, please. And some of the technology inventions in this particular year. The LED. The first LED was invented in 1962 by Nick Holonjak while working as a scientific assessor in General Electric. It emitted a low-intensity red light. And also the communication satellite, which was the Telstar 1, was launched to space by the United States the 10th of July of this particular year, and it was capable of receive, amplified, and retransmit signals instead of just reflecting them to Earth. Next, please.
and some international relations. Next, please. Where the International Agreement on the Neutrality of Laos, that it was in 1962, a peace conference in Geneva produced this declaration, and a